Double Tap is the second book in my Rip and Wilma series. I'm actually going to start out with a little explanation. I'm going to read an excerpt from the book that explains very briefly who Rip and Wilma are and what they do. And then I'm going to read a chapter farther on in the book to show them in action. And this is all Rip's voice. So, at this point, you may be wondering about Wilma and me. Almost 20 years ago, we bonded over a discussion of Nietzsche and arson in a bar in Ann Arbor. While we understood the concept of rationality, we never applied it to what we did. Rationalizing was for those who felt guilt for their actions. Guilt, or any other emotion, was not one of our flaws. Long ago, we'd come to the terms with the fact that we were high-functioning psychopaths. We do what we do even if we weren't paid for it. But instead of getting into a car and randomly crisscrossing the country, killing hitchhikers, we apply basic business principles to our predilections. So far, it's worked out pretty well. We make a good living, and we're not greedy. There are plenty of high-end contract killers and assassins who operate in the million-dollar category. We skew more toward the middle class, who are sadly unrepresented in the assassin-for-hire market. Wilma and I each have our roles. I'm the public face of our little enterprise. I meet our clients, discuss their needs, and pick up payment for when we've done the deed. I also meet with our suppliers, such as Dell. While he may suspect that I don't work alone, Dell was never tempted to stick his hand into the tiger's cage, which is a good thing given Wilma's strong preference for pain and power tools. In her spare time, she does wonderful needlepoint and is a better chef than Hannibal Lecter. Not surprising, considering her skill with the butcher knife. But beyond cuisine and needlepoint, Wilma has few passions in life. Occasionally, we find ourselves in bed together. Sex with Wilma is a little like playing chess, always 5 moves ahead. While I'm on the crest of orgasmic fury, in her head, she's already showered and is eating breakfast. It's unnerving. Few people have met Wilma face to face in a business situation. Those who have don't last very long. You probably have the impression that Wilma is cold and cruel, and she is, but no more than a Verizon customer service rep. The bottom line is Wilma is the best person to have covering my back. Now I'm going to skip ahead in the book to when they have gone to South Carolina. Most of their adventures take place in Detroit, but for this particular job they had to go to South Carolina. And they grabbed a biker who they met earlier in the book, a guy named Bob Neal. And Bob Neal looked suitably terrified. We parked the van on top of a hill overlooking a drainage pond in remote country, just over the Georgia state line. "Have a beer, Bob." I handed him a long-necked bud. Neal took it gratefully, twisted off the cap, and drank it down. The alcohol gave him false courage. He looked at Wilma and leered. "I remember you from Sawmill Grove, sugar tits." I expected Wilma to tear him a new one. Instead, she just smiled sweetly. "Would you like another beer?" He held out his empty bottle. Wilma nodded at a large metal oil drum. "In there." Neal smirked and tossed his bottle into the drum so hard it shattered. "Now, Bob, we just have a few questions and then we can all be on our way," I said, handing him another beer to keep the wheels lubricated. Neal took off the bottle cap and started to throw it on the ground. Then he had a second thought and tossed it into the drum. It clicked against the shattered glass. He burped and swallowed the contents of the bottle. And another, and another, and another. Luckily, he wasn't driving. The more he drank, the sloppier he became. His words became slurred, and his aim got bad. Wilma picked up several of the bottles and missed the bin. She tossed them inside for him, and the smashing glass made Neal's smile even wider. He leaned his head back and let the sun warm his face. It's nice up here. His words all ran together. Bob, when did you get out? Neil looked over at me and grinned. I was never really in prison. They just put me in there to watch for whoever showed up to see Randy Yamaha. He held out his hand for another bud. I passed him one and he drank it greedily. Then what? I was supposed to tell Scoggins. Did you tell him about me? Of course. He put an arm around my shoulder like we were best buddies. He didn't like you at all. I smiled at the memory of the surprised look on Scoggins' face when Wilma exploded a microcharge inside him. What else can you tell me? Neil summoned up his alcohol-enhanced defiance. I'm no rat. I ignored him and continued pushing. Who was the man in the Escalade? Wilma slid up to him, pressed her hip gently against his, rubbing it in a teasing way. Come on, Bobby, you can tell us. She held out another bottle and took the empty from his hand. Wilma casually tossed it over her shoulder and it smashed inside the barrel. Neil was impressed. He drank the beer, threw the bottle up in the air, and it came down with a large crash inside the barrel. Wilma caressed his thigh. Neil was sweating and his face had turned a lovely shade of beet. Stench, he gasped. His name is Marvin Stench. He's a real asshole. And what else can you tell us about him? I don't know much, Neil said in a breath, as Wilma swept her palm lightly across his crotch. He uses us for protection sometimes and to keep an eye on things. But you don't know who he is? Wilma whispered seductively. Neil shook his head. Nope, just that he pays well. Oh, that's a shame. Neil looked at her in drunken wonder. A shame? Wilma pinched a muscle next to his bulging neck, a trick the late Leonard Nimoy taught her. Neil went limp and sagged into her arms. Wilma dragged him to a drum, and I helped her dump him in. Then she picked up the large metal lid and hammered it into place, sealing Neil inside. He pounded frantically on the lid. I tipped the barrel over, and a muffled shriek filtered through the sealed container. Don't worry, Bobby. You're going to have a barrel of fun. Wilma gave it a kick, and the barrel began to roll down the hill. Neil's screams intensified as the broken beer bottles inside turned him into steak tartare. Thank you.